Hello and welcome to my first ever Q&A. First, the 3 top questions that I always get. How did you become an English teacher? Well, this happened by accident. I actually followed my wife to teacher training college and went to become a primary school teacher. That was not a good move. I did not have the patience for 7-year-olds. So after 2 years, I quit that and went to do an English degree, and then with a huge overdraft became a tax inspector. Meanwhile, I went on a few school trips with my wife's school and I kind of connected with teaching. It seemed like a really cool way to make a difference. At number 2, how do you revise? Well, I didn't know this when I was your age, but the key to revision is actually a habit. It doesn't pay you to save your revision to the end of the course. If you do a little bit of revision every day during the course, you will remember much more for far less effort. That is amazing. It's like compound interest. If you don't understand compound interest, go ahead and learn about it now because it will affect your whole future. For example, I have no mortgage. That's only possible because I understood compound interest. With revision, it works like this. Every time you revise something and forget it and revise it again later, you learn more, remember more, and forget more slowly. If you save your revision to the end, you learn it for a little bit of time and then it's gone. But make it a habit you can always stick to. So even if it's just 5 minutes a day, start at 5 minutes a day. Then you'll have a habit that you will always be able to succeed in and you will never feel like a failure, which is after all why most of us give up trying a new habit. As you reach 5 minutes, some days you'll do 10, 20, half an hour, sometimes even an hour. But that won't matter. It's not a target you've got to reach. The target is I will revise every single day, which is why 5 minutes is going to be the key. What is your favourite book? It is an amazing, bizarre story by Kurt Vonnegut. It's called Slaughterhouse-Five. I can't really describe it properly. It involves time travel, being a specimen in an alien zoo, and the Allied destruction of Dresden. Oh, and it's funny. Ace Paprika asks, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And actually I've made a video on this subject during lockdown. I can't understand why it just hasn't blown up the internet, but the answer is here. Princess K-pop asks me, what made me want to become a teacher and an influencer on YouTube? I kind of got into having a YouTube channel when I realised that I could record my ideas, my teaching for my students, and it wouldn't just be gone in a flash like a lesson is and forgotten. They could come back to it again and again and get better and better. Amazingly, my students weren't all keen on this idea, but I did it to make a difference. And, for the half of the class or the third of the class who were passionate about learning, it was a godsend so that they were able to get top grades really easily. I really don't like the idea of being an influencer. It seems a bit bizarre, although I did get a viewer to make his family hot Ribena. Harry Leoman asks, I just wanted to ask how I'd be able to predict a question in an essay and how to prepare for it. Well, Harry, I'm really glad you asked. I have made a few videos on this. However, the answer is really simple. If the question is about a character or if the question is about a theme, it's actually always a different question. The different question is this: what is the author trying to persuade us about? What's the author's point of view? Now, once you understand the author's point of view, that influences what they're up to with the character, and it influences what they're up to with a theme. So by revising and preparing an essay on the author's point of view, you will always be able to get top grades, no matter what the wording in the question is. Mr. Newbie Pants says, I'm made fun of for studying in school and students say I study for no reason. So do you have any dialogue for that? Well, I've got lots of dialogue for that, but let me think about something that might work. So here's a fact. 50% of 17 to 30-year-olds go to university. So if you don't study, you're effectively sticking yourself in the other 50%. And if you think about your long-term future, which one is likely to be better? Well, for most people, it's if they've gone to university. Now, the next stage is, well, if 50% are going to university, loads of people who haven't studied particularly hard are going to make it. So how do you get into the top 20%? Because obviously, if everybody's got a flipping degree, then a degree on its own isn't worth that much. You need a really good degree from a good university, which is a bit of a pain, but you can only do that if you study. So that's a kind of practical argument. But then I guess there's the touchy-feely sort of argument where you say to them, right, okay, pick 5 people that you admire, and they've got to be real people that you know, not celebrities or influencers. Pick 5 people that you know and admire and ask them, do you think I should study and do well academically or not? And what would those 5 people say? Well, I'm imagining they'd say you ought to study. If that person has 5 people they admire who don't want them to study, well, then they're not going to, and why would you listen to those people anyway? Hopefully they're not watching my channel because they don't study. Now, that kind of student isn't going to be interested in any kind of argument, and my son perfected 2 brilliant techniques, and it was to reply to them with either your face or your mum. So somebody says to you, you're studying too much, what good is that going to do you? And you say, your face, what good is that going to do you? Or they say to you, you're boring, and then you say to them, your mum's boring. Or, if you don't want to fight, your face is boring. Which is deeply childish, but much appreciated by the kind of audience that you're talking about. I once did this for 5 minutes of a lesson, that every question that a student asked, I just replied with, your face or your mum. Because let's face it, not everyone's going to get by on their looks. Charlie Dowie says, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and given? I guess the best piece of advice I'd give people is be curious. The more curious you are, the more fun it is to learn things that you don't know. And I don't just mean in an academic sense, I mean understanding the world at large. Many of the problems you face in life is because you just accept things as they are, and you can't see a way for anything, either in your personal life or the world at large, to get better. But if you're curious, you'll find loads of ways to improve your life, to improve your thinking and the way you feel about things. Be curious. And then the advice that I'd give is, don't let that curiosity make you try things where you know if you enjoy them, they'll ruin your life. So yes, that's obvious about drugs, but it's also true about smoking, and it's also true about golf. I mean, don't do things that are going to involve you making massive sacrifices for the rest of your time on Earth. Hotspur49 asks, if you were Education Secretary, how would you reform the GCSE system to make it better? Well, I could rant for hours on this, but really I would just want to make it real. So you don't just study food, you learn how to be a chef. You don't just do woodwork, you make things as a carpenter would make them. You don't just do random science experiments where the teacher already knows the answer. You do real experiments where you don't know the answer. For example, testing the pollution in the rivers near the school, or designing and installing your own solar panel to see how much electricity you can generate. In English, you'd actually learn to write in ways that real writers write. Proper short stories, poetry, plays. You wouldn't bother testing reading because obviously if you can write well, you've already mastered the reading part. In languages, you'd think about getting students to be able to speak the language abroad. At least 60% of the exam would be a speaking exam with a natural speaker of that language. Because obviously you'd be able to read that language and listen to it. You wouldn't have to mark those separately. You just have to be able to have proper conversations. If teaching were real in this way, it would be so much more fun for the student because their learning would matter. And it would be so much more fun for the teacher because the exams wouldn't be random assessments. They'd actually be testing valuable stuff that teachers cared about. Hotspur49 also says, what advice have you got for somebody who doesn't enjoy English?
Well, I'd say you've got to change your idea of what enjoy is. Nobody enjoys vinegar or pepper or olives or beetroot. The first time they taste them, they find it disgusting. But once you educate your palate by trying dozens of different foods, eat at a Michelin star restaurant, well, then you educate your taste buds, don't you? And suddenly a world of amazing meals opens up to you. You can travel the world moving from one taste explosion to another. Well, it's the same with books. When you first start reading difficult books, they're difficult. Your brain says, no, I don't want to do this. But after a while, you educate your taste buds, and then you'll enjoy it. Persevere, struggle, it's worth it.
He also asks, is there anything you used to teach that you now believe to be useless?
Yeah, I think most of the reading paper questions are by and large pretty useless. Because let's imagine that we just trained students to be fantastic at writing. Would they also be brilliant at reading? Well, of course they would. Would they be brilliant at reading in order to be brilliant at creating text that people wanted to read? Obviously. So the reading questions, they're just a load of rubbish. The proper place for them, of course, is in the literature exam. And that's where we find them. We don't need them in language. So that's a useless thing that I teach constantly. Now, the other thing that I used to think was useless, and I've now changed my mind dramatically, is spelling. I used to think that we've got dozens of devices which autocorrect spelling, and you can become a brilliant writer and just be a bad speller, and it doesn't matter. But actually it does matter, because if you're a poor speller, you judge yourself badly. And perhaps even more importantly, employers, strangers, potential wives and husbands, they'll judge you badly as well if you can't spell. And spelling is only a matter of memory. Okay, it's not easy to remember, but it's still just memory and rehearsal, practice and rehearsal. So learn to spell.
How many of you with bad spelling haven't spent at least 10 minutes every single day to improve your spelling? Well, all of you. If you had spent 10 minutes every single day to improve your spelling, you'd have stopped quite a few years ago because you'd have said, hey, I can spell. Bedazzled Blue asks, well, what would you talk about if you were writing a letter to yourself in the future? And that's a really brilliant idea. Stephen Fry did it actually when he was 17. You've got to think about your future self. So I wouldn't write a load of predictions, which obviously, because the future is unknowable, are going to turn out to be wrong and you'll just sound stupid. Instead, I'd write about the things that you're passionate about, because your future self will be very curious. Some of those passions they will completely have forgotten. Others they'll laugh at. Others they'll still share and be fascinated to see how those passions have come across time. And there'll be others they want to reconnect with. In other words, you will be able to influence your future self through the passions that you have now. So let them know what matters to you. Your True Hijabi asks, how do you stay motivated throughout A-levels and have enough determination to constantly revise every day and not procrastinate? I guess there would be two ways. Number one, when you're in lessons, try to learn everything. Make notes about absolutely everything you're taught. Look over your notes at the end of the day and you'll find stuff that you no longer understand fully. Ask your teachers about those things. That will make your lesson time much more productive. And then the next thing I'd do is get that revision habit, 10 minutes a day, every day, through the power of compound interest, will make you succeed. And as you get better and better, that makes you want to succeed even more. You'll start investing 15 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day, and that will make you better and better, which then gives you the impetus to do more when you need to. Motivation comes from reward, and reward comes from success. So you need to find a way to build a constant pattern of success. Ace Your GCSEs says, what are the best and worst things about being an English teacher? I'd say the best and worst things are always the kids. And I don't mean like misbehaviour of the kids. So what rewards me, but I imagine most teachers, is when you ignite a spark in your students' imaginations or their thinking, when you change something and make a difference. And when that happens, you get a tremendous feeling of success. You know, there's a point to you being alive and doing the job that you're doing. But set against that, of course, are the students where, despite your best efforts, they don't succeed in the way that you know they can. And that's the most frustrating thing. You know, if I didn't aim my channels at top grades, I'd probably get a lot more viewers. There are other ways I could make my channel better, obviously. But I struggle with students who are happy with grades 4, 5 or 6. Because I believe everyone's capable of higher grades. Like, genuinely. But persuading students of that? Man, that's tough. Because nobody else is telling them that. Or very few. So that's the hardest thing. Ace Your GCSEs also says, like, if you could go back in time, would you still become an English teacher? That's a really good question. As you know, I tried real life first. I didn't start teaching till I was 28. One of the great things an education gives you is that knowledge that you could actually do almost anything. When I was 38, I was going to give up teaching and become a carpenter.
And staying in teaching was just really a kind of lucky accident. So no, I probably would be a builder, designing and building my own houses, making DIY videos with a channel with millions of subscribers. I just don't know.
Bedazzled Blue asks, what languages would you learn if you had a chance and why? And if you also had a chance to move countries, would it be Spain?
So I spent the years from age 3 to 10 living in Ibiza in Spain. Then my family went bankrupt and we moved to Canada for a year where I was an illegal immigrant. And then after that we got deported back to England where again I was 11 years old and I was an outsider. So I guess my childhood years were all spent as an outsider, which is a fascinating experience. It's not one that I particularly enjoyed a lot of the time. However, it's given me a really useful perspective as an adult. So I'm really attracted to the idea of going to live in a different country. I still fancy that. My sister, for example, keeps dreaming of going back to Ibiza, but I wouldn't do that. I'd go somewhere new. I could actually go abroad for 4 months every year and live in a different country. And if I could, America would be fantastic, but so would Italy. And obviously, Spain would be attractive. I spent the summer in France this year and it was amazing. I fell in love with the mountains. And of course, I want to be a snowboard instructor, so the mountains is the place to go. But if I had to pick one country that I'd love to learn the language and explore because I don't know enough about it, it would be Germany. And mainly that's because my mum was of that generation that grew up during the Second World War and she hated the Germans. And so I feel, you know what, it's time to forgive and forget. And I visited Germany many times and found it amazing.
Noah Brearley asks, what is your advice for how to choose your future career? Follow your passions, Noah. You can't predict what your career is going to be. One of the most intelligent and driven students I ever taught always wanted to be a lawyer. His work experience was in the law courts. He was committed to it. He did science-based A-levels, but when he started his A-levels, he suddenly realised actually maybe he'd prefer to be a doctor. And he got brilliant A-level results and went to Oxford to do a medical degree. But while he was there, he got fascinated by the research and got into further study and then went off to Harvard. So he's never been a lawyer and he's never practiced as a doctor, but he's always followed his passions. My wife and I never wanted to be teachers. That wasn't something we were interested in as a career. So what I'd say is study the stuff that you're passionate about and your careers, because there'll be more than one, will take care of themselves. Jensen Martin asks, would you rather be able to undo or copy and paste? That's my top question. I love that question. Look, we all make mistakes, but they're in the past. And if we got rid of those mistakes, we'd probably make new ones. And looking back on the past is unproductive and painful. You know, I still do it. I'm doing the washing up and suddenly a memory will come back of something that I said to someone that I shouldn't have said, or an unkindness, and it kind of gets you, you know, but you can't change the past, and you just have to let it go. Whereas copy and paste, that's how DNA reproduces, that's how evolution comes about, that's how variety happens in the world, because you copy and paste, and as you do so, you change it slightly, you get new ideas, or in DNA terms, there's a mutation that turns out to be beneficial. So the explosion of life and the explosion of ideas in the world, that's copy and paste. I'm a copy and paste guy every day of the week. Jake Scott asks, do you think that the future of education belongs on the internet? Well, that's a fantastic question. This is my second favourite question. Yes, let me explain why. No matter what my quality is as a teacher, when I do an instructional video, that's always more efficient than whatever brilliance I produce in the classroom, which after all is forgotten once it's gone. So an online lesson is much shorter. I know I chat a lot, but still much shorter and much more useful over time than anything I can deliver in the classroom. But the internet also gives us the opportunity for gathering massive data. So for example, you might find that you study a video for 10 minutes on subject X, but the algorithm that studies all this data knows that people like you who respond for 6 minutes to video on X will therefore gain much greater understanding if you study this next video and then this next video, whereas someone who watched 10 minutes on X would be given a different pathway based on how students in the past have learned. So learning could become totally personalized. You would constantly get content directed at you that has been proven to be beneficial to other students like you. So if there are any big sponsors out there, if Bill Gates, if you're watching and you want to invest in a school of the future, or maybe an academy chain that would be interested, it would be really, really possible to develop this kind of big data crunching where you would understand how each individual learner learns and therefore what to give them next. They would learn far more quickly than they do in the current classroom, because you wouldn't have teachers distracted by the needs of the other 28 people in the room. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are as a teacher, it's impossible to get into the head of each individual. Whereas, Amazon knows if you're pregnant before you do, based on the sorts of stuff that you're searching for, which is scary because, well, I didn't know I'd put on that much weight. And the other benefit of that is then schools could become centres of valuable experience. Everyone would learn a musical instrument and get to perform in a band, and you'd all be taught how to be as brilliant as you could at painting and art. You'd do sport every day. Stuff that the internet can't teach you, but real human beings and interaction with human beings can. And there are a huge number of things that people would think of to use their time in school. There'd be public speaking, there'd be debates. You'd learn how to be a chef rather than just cook a few random meals during the year. You'd learn how to be a carpenter rather than cut a few pieces of wood in interesting joints. And you'd have more time for those subjects because the internet part of learning would probably take 2.5, 3 hours a day, which would leave you so much more time to get good at the other stuff. And obviously, to find your passions.
I had no idea it would take so long to make this video and film it so badly. I'm really sorry. I promise not to make another one like this again. If you've got to the end, you are an awesome viewer, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. See you soon on my channel for some educational content.